Sam Colt didn't knock. He set the bread and the jar of milk on the porch railing, turned his hat in his hands, and walked away before she could tell him no. He'd heard what the men at the feed store said, that Clara Hollister was too proud to take charity, too broken to be saved, and too far gone to matter anymore. He didn't believe a single word of it. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. What happened on the seventh morning changed everything. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1883 hit Caldwell Creek, Wyoming like a punishment. The heat pressed down on the town from the moment the sun cracked the eastern ridge, and it didn't let up until well past dark. Dust hung in the air so thick a person could taste it on their tongue. The creek itself had dropped to a crawl, brown and slow, and the cattle ranchers up on the North Range were already talking about what a bad autumn was coming. Clara Hollister was not thinking about autumn. She was thinking about the 11 cents in her apron pocket, and whether it would stretch to flour and salt pork, and whether she could look her daughters in the eye tonight, over a supper she hadn't yet figured out how to make. She stood at the dry goods counter in Whitmore's general store and did not let her hands shake. "That'll be 42 cents, Mrs. Hollister," said Gerald Whitmore, not unkindly, but not kindly either. He was a small man with a careful ledger and a longer memory. Clara set down the flour. She set down the salt pork. She kept the cornmeal and the single tin of molasses, and pushed the coins across the counter without a word. "You're 17 cents short, even with what you've got there." "I know what I'm short," she said. She kept her chin level. She had learned that much from 8 months of widowhood. Keep the chin level, keep the voice even, and do not let Gerald Whitmore or anyone else in this town see the place inside you that was caving in. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of 2 women from the church auxiliary. She didn't have to turn around to know who they were. Martha Gaines and her sister, Dora Pratt. She could identify them by the particular pitch of their whispers, a sound she'd come to know the way a person knows the sound of a door they've heard close 1,000 times. "Poor thing," Martha said, which was the cruelest way a woman in Caldwell Creek knew how to say something. "Thomas left her in a state," Dora agreed. "I heard she hasn't paid the property tax. Come September, the county'll take that land." Clara picked up what she could afford and turned for the door. She did not look at either of them. She did not say goodbye to Gerald Whitmore. She pushed out into the wall of summer heat and walked the quarter-mile back toward home, with her spine straight and her jaw tight, and her heart doing something terrible and quiet beneath her ribs. She was almost to the corner of the main road when she heard boots on the boardwalk behind her, moving at a pace that was not rushing but was definitely gaining. "Excuse me, ma'am." She stopped because that was what a person did when addressed, not because she wanted to. The man who came around to face her was tall, well over 6 feet, with a face that had been lived in, hard and honestly sunburned across the cheekbones. A jaw that hadn't met a razor in 4 or 5 days. He wore the clothes of a working man, a faded canvas shirt, worn trousers, boots that had seen every road between here and the Dakotas. He held his hat in both hands, the way a man does when he's trying to show he means no offense. "Sam Colt," he said. "I work the Harding Ranch, out past Ridgeline." "I know where the Harding Ranch is." "Yes, ma'am." He turned the hat once in his hands. "I couldn't help it over here." "Then you should have helped yourself not to," she said. His mouth did something, not quite a smile, not quite a flinch. He held his ground. "I've got more than I need out at the bunkhouse. Bread, milk from this morning. Nothing I'll use before it turns." Clara looked at him the way she'd learned to look at things that seemed too good. carefully, and with both eyes open for what was wrong with them. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Colt." "Didn't say it was charity." "What would you call it?" "Neighborly," he said. "You don't live near enough to be my neighbor." "Half-mile ain't so far." She shifted the cornmeal under her arm. "I appreciate the thought," she said, in the tone that meant she did not appreciate it at all, and he should leave her alone now. "Good day." She walked. He did not follow. When Clara got home, Sarah was in the yard with Ella, the two of them trying to coax a listless dog into playing. The dog too smart and too hot to bother. Sarah was 12, long-limbed and watchful, with Thomas's dark eyes and a quiet that was too old for her face. Ella was 7 and had not yet learned to be quiet about anything. "Mama, what'd you get?" Ella called, running over. "Enough." "Is that all the bags there is?" "Ella." The girl subsided, but only part way. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's talent for finding the softest place in an argument and pressing on it. Sarah looked at the bags. She didn't ask anything. She just moved to take them from Clara's arms. And that, the careful, practiced competence of her 12-year-old daughter, who had learned not to ask, was the thing that came closest to breaking Clara right there in the yard. "Go wash up," Clara said. "Both of you." She made cornmeal porridge for supper with molasses and called it a fine summer meal and told the girls to eat slow. Ella complained there was no salt pork. Sarah told Ella to hush. Clara told them both that tomorrow would be better and meant it less than she'd meant anything in recent memory. After the girls were asleep, she sat at Thomas's desk. She still called it that, still couldn't quite make it her own, and looked at the numbers she'd written out 3 different times now, as if writing them again would change them. The property tax was due the 15th of September. She was short by $6.40. $6.40 might as well have been 100, for all she could see how to get there. Thomas had been a good man. He had not been a careful one. He'd believed the land would take care of them, the way men in 1883 believed in land, the way earlier men had believed in Providence, with total conviction and very little evidence. Then a fever came in the February cold, and Thomas was gone in 9 days. And what he had left behind was a half-broken plow, a leaking roof, 32 acres of dry pasture, and 2 daughters who still sometimes called for him in the night. Clara put her head in her hands and breathed until she could breathe normally again. She did not cry. She had learned to be economical about that, too. The next morning, Clara came out to the porch in the early gray light to pull the water from the well before the heat set in. There was a small wrapped bundle on the railing. She stopped. She looked around the yard, the road, the tree line. Nothing. No one. Just the sound of a meadowlark somewhere off in the pasture, and the heat already starting to build in the eastern sky. She unwrapped the bundle slowly, like it might be a trap. Bread. 1 round loaf, still faintly warm, and a corked jar of fresh milk, set carefully in the shade so it hadn't turned. She stood there for a long moment with the bread in her hands. Then she set it back on the railing, went inside, and started the fire for breakfast. She told herself she wasn't going to use it. She used it. The girls ate like she hadn't seen them eat in 2 weeks. Ella dunked her bread in the milk until it was nearly soup and demanded more. Sarah ate quietly, carefully, in a way that told Clara she was tasting every bite and trying to make it last. Clara ate nothing herself and called it not being hungry. "Where'd this come from, Mama?" Sarah asked. "A neighbor," Clara said. "Which neighbor? We don't got neighbors except—" "Eat your breakfast, Sarah." She thought about walking out to the Harding Ranch and leaving the empty jar on the fence post with a note that said, "Thank you, but no thank you." She thought about it seriously enough that she got halfway to composing the note in her head. She didn't go. The next morning there was bread again, and milk. On the third morning, she was already awake when she heard the faint sound of boots on the dirt path. She moved to the front window, careful not to let the curtain shift. Sam Colt moved like a man who was not trying to make noise or make a show. He came up the path with a cloth-wrapped bundle tucked under one arm, set it on the railing with the same quiet care a person uses in a house where somebody's sleeping, and turned to go. Clara opened the door. He stopped. He turned. He held his hat. "You're going to have to stop this," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't move. "I mean it. I'm not a charity case, and I don't intend to become one." "I know you're not." "Then why do you keep coming?" He was quiet for a moment. The sun wasn't fully up yet, and in the half-light, he looked less like a stranger and more like something that had simply always been at the edge of this yard. "My mother was a widow," he said. "Had 4 of us under 8 years old. Man in the next homestead over brought food for about 6 months until she got on her feet." He paused. "She told that story until the day she died. Said it was the only reason any of us grew up." Clara looked at him. "That story supposed to make me feel better about taking your bread?" "No, ma'am. It's supposed to explain why I ain't going to stop bringing it." She opened her mouth, and then she closed it again. He nodded once, turned, and walked back down the path. On the 4th morning, she was on the porch before he arrived, sitting in the old wooden chair with a cup of weak coffee, and when he came up the path and saw her there, he didn't stop or look startled. He just came forward and set the bread and the milk on the railing and looked at her with his hat in his hands. "You eat breakfast?" she asked. She didn't know why she asked it. "Not yet." "I've got coffee. It ain't good coffee." "I'd appreciate it all the same." She went in and got a second cup. He sat on the porch steps and she stayed in her chair, and they drank the terrible coffee and didn't say much. And the morning birds made enough noise to fill in all the spaces. "How long have you been at Harding's?" she asked eventually. "Going on 3 years." "You from Wyoming?" "Colorado originally. Drifted north after the drought of '79. He turned the cup in his hands. "You from here?" "Kansas. Thomas brought us here in '78. She paused. He thought Wyoming was going to be something. "Maybe it still is," Sam said. She looked at him sideways. "You always this optimistic?" "No, ma'am." The corner of his mouth moved. "Just this morning." She didn't smile, but something in her chest did something that she chose to ignore. On the 5th morning, Ella got up before Clara and was already on the porch when Sam came up the path. Clara heard the sound of a child's voice and was out the door in a flat second, heart hammering. Because that was what motherhood did to a woman, turned every unexpected sound into a potential disaster. But Ella was standing at the top of the porch steps with both arms crossed, looking up at Sam Colt with Thomas's exact expression of firm suspicion. "Who are you?" Ella demanded. "Sam Colt, miss. I work the Harding Ranch." "Why do you keep bringing our bread?" "Ella," Clara said sharply from the doorway. Ella did not flinch. "Mama says we don't take charity." "Your mama's right," Sam said. "This ain't charity. This is just—" He paused, choosing carefully. "This is just one neighbor looking after another." Ella considered him with the full weight of a 7-year-old's judgment. "We're not your neighbor. You live a whole half-mile." "That's close enough, I reckon." "Reckon," Ella repeated, like the word was funny to her. "You sound like a cowboy." "I am a cowboy, miss." "I know. I can see by your boots." She looked down at them with the critical eye of someone who had opinions. "They're real dusty." "Ella," Clara said, closing the door behind her and coming out onto the porch, "go wake your sister and get washed." "But—" "Now." Ella went, glancing back twice. Sam turned his hat in his hands and looked like a man who was trying very hard not to find something amusing. "I apologize," Clara said. "Don't. She's just—" He stopped. "What?" "She's just fine," he said simply. "She's real fine, Mrs. Hollister." Clara looked at him for a moment. She had gotten used to people looking at her daughters with expressions that mixed pity and discomfort, the way people looked at all things they didn't know how to help. Sam Colt looked at Ella the way you looked at something that was doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing. It unsettled her more than she could easily explain. On the 6th morning, he didn't come. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she was glad. She had been planning to tell him again to stop anyway, and now she wouldn't have to have the conversation, and that was a relief. She stood at the window for 20 minutes before she accepted what she was doing and walked away from it. That evening, Martha Gaines came by with her sister Dora, which meant they hadn't come to bring anything but news, the way women do when the news is too good to send by letter. "We heard Sam Colt's been coming round," Martha said, over the coffee Clara had made, because hospitality was not something Clara allowed herself to abandon, no matter the cost. "He's brought some extra provisions," Clara said, "from the ranch." Martha and Dora exchanged a look of the kind women perfect over years of practice. "You know his reputation, of course." "I don't." "He left a woman in Colorado," Dora said. "Engaged. Left her 2 weeks before the wedding and rode north." Clara looked at her cup. "I'm just saying," Martha continued. "A man who wanders in with bread and smiles is still a man who wanders. Thomas, God rest him, was at least a settled man." Clara set her cup down carefully. "Thank you for coming," she said, in a voice that did not have a single extra degree of warmth in it. She had them out the door in 7 minutes. But later, after the girls were in bed and the house was quiet and dark, she sat at Thomas's desk again and let Martha's words sit where they'd landed. A man who left. A man who drifted. A man who was bringing bread to a widow's house every morning for reasons she still didn't entirely understand. She told herself she didn't care. She was a practical woman. She had no room in her life for a man who would leave. On the 7th morning, she was up before dawn, and she was waiting on the porch with her coffee and her spine straight and everything she intended to say already composed and ready. She heard his boots on the path. She watched him come up through the early light, the bread under his arm, the jar of milk in one hand, moving with that quiet, unhurried certainty that had started to feel, against all her better judgment, like something she recognized. He saw her, and he didn't slow down. He came up to the railing and set things down and looked at her. "Mr. Colt," she said. "Mrs. Hollister, I need you to stop." His jaw moved. He nodded, slow. "All right." "It's not that I don't appreciate it. I do. But people are talking, and I have daughters to think about, and I can't have—" She stopped. "I can't have people thinking that we're—" "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice was quiet and even. "I'm sorry if I made things harder for you." That wasn't the intent. She had expected him to argue. The lack of argument threw her off, and in the space it left, she heard herself ask a thing she had not planned to ask. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Why any of it?" she said. "You don't know me. Thomas has been gone 8 months. You've never spoken to me before last week. Why bread and milk every single morning? Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer at all. Then he said, "Because I saw you in Whitmore's store. I saw the way you put that flower back and didn't let your face show a thing. And I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought that was the bravest thing I've ever seen a person do. And it seemed wrong for a person that brave to have to go home empty-handed." Clara didn't say anything. The meadowlark in the pasture called twice and went quiet. "I'll stop," Sam said, "if that's what you want. I'll stop, and I won't come back." He picked up his hat. "But I'd like you to know, if you ever need anything, anything at all, I'm a half-mile away, and I'm not going anywhere." He turned to leave, and Clara Hollister, who had kept her chin level for 8 months, who had learned to be economical about tears, who had been practical and proud and careful and everything that surviving required a woman to be, said one word to the back of him, almost before she knew she'd said it. "Tomorrow," she said. He stopped. "Tomorrow," she said again, steadier. "Coffee's on before sunup. Bring yourself too, not just the bread." She watched his shoulders do something quiet and certain. He turned just enough to let her see the side of his face, and what was on it was not a grin or a triumph. It was something much simpler than that. "Yes, ma'am," Sam Colt said, and he walked back down the path with the bread still under his arm, and Clara sat on her porch with her cold coffee and her heart doing something she absolutely refused to name. And the summer sun came up hard and golden over the eastern ridge, and the meadowlark sang again, and the morning was, impossibly, enough. He came back. She hadn't been entirely sure he would. She'd lain awake for a good part of the night telling herself it didn't matter either way, that she'd made a practical decision, and if he showed up, fine, and if he didn't, fine. And none of it had anything to do with the way her heart had moved when he'd said, "I'm not going anywhere." But he came back. 6:15 in the morning, boots on the path, bread under his arm, hat in his hand. And this time he knocked. Clara opened the door and stepped aside without a word, and he came in and set the bread on the table like a man who'd done it before, which he hadn't, but it looked that way. And something about that settled her and alarmed her in equal measure. She poured the coffee. He sat at the end of the table, and she sat at the side, and they were quiet for a while in the way of two people who were still learning the shape of each other's silence. "Girl still asleep?" he asked. "Ella's up. She's just waiting to make an entrance." As if she'd been cued, Ella appeared in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, hair going in 4 directions, holding a rag doll that had seen better decades. She looked at Sam, then at her mother, then back at Sam. "You came back," Ella said. "I did." "Mama said you would." She walked to the table and climbed into the chair across from him, with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who had not yet learned to be embarrassed about anything. She said, "Probably. That means she thought you would, but didn't want to say so." "Ella," Clara said, "that's what probably means, Mama." Sam's mouth twitched. Clara looked at her coffee cup. "What's your dolly's name?" Sam asked. Ella considered him, then decided the question was acceptable. "June. She's named after the month." "That's a fine name." "Papa named her." The words landed simply, the way a child lands them, without armor, without ceremony. "He said June was the best month because that's when everything's already warm, but the summer ain't ruined yet." The kitchen went quiet. Sam looked at the little girl across from him, and something moved through his face that he didn't try to hide. "Your papa sounds like he was a smart man." "He was," Ella said, completely certain. "He was the smartest." She looked down at the doll. "I still talk to him. Mama says that's okay." "Your mama's right," Sam said quietly. Clara stood up and turned to the stove because she needed a reason to have her back to the room for a moment. She heard Ella ask Sam whether he'd ever been to Kansas, and Sam say he'd ridden through Abilene once, and Ella announced that Abilene was nothing because she'd never been there. But she'd heard it was flat. And gradually, the kitchen filled back up with ordinary sound, and Clara breathed until she could breathe normally and turned around again. Sarah appeared 10 minutes later, dressed and washed and watchful, and she stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds looking at the man at her mother's table before she came in and sat down. "Sarah, this is Mr. Colt," Clara said. "He works the Harding Ranch." "I know who he is," Sarah said, not unkindly. "I've seen you in town." "Yes, miss," Sam said. Sarah poured herself coffee with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for years, which she had been, because Clara had needed the help, and Sarah had simply become the kind of girl who provided it. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at Sam with Thomas's dark eyes. "You going to keep coming around?" she asked. "Sarah," Clara said, "I'm asking a plain question, Mama." She didn't look away from Sam. "Are you?" Sam met her eyes without flinching. "That's up to your mother." "I know it's up to her. I'm asking what you want." A beat. Sam set his cup down. "I'd like to," he said, "if she'll have me." Sarah held his gaze another long moment. Then she looked at her mother, and something passed between them that Clara couldn't quite catch and file away before it was gone. And Sarah nodded once, short and private, and picked up her coffee again. "Bread's good," she said. "Thank you, miss." "Don't call me miss, I'm 12. "Yes, ma'am," Sam said, and something cracked open at the table. A thin seam of warmth, and even Clara felt it. Even Clara, who had gotten so careful about feeling things that she'd built a whole system of dams around anything that might overflow. He came every morning that week, and then the next. The visit settled into a shape without anyone deciding on the shape. He came at 6:15, the bread and milk on the table, coffee after, 30 or 40 minutes of conversation that ranged from the practical to the occasional and startling personal, and then back to the practical again. And then he was gone before 7, because he had a ranch to get to, and Clara had daughters to get to school, and 100 tasks that didn't pause for anything, least of all, mornings on the porch with a man who had a good jaw and an honest way of listening. She told herself it was just company. She told herself it was nothing a sensible woman ought to worry about. On a Thursday morning, toward the end of the 3rd week, she was showing him where the roof leaked above the back bedroom, and he'd climbed up to look without being asked, and when he came back down, she found herself looking at the line of his shoulders against the morning sky for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and she turned away sharp and told herself to get a hold of herself. "Clara Hollister, you are 34 years old, and you have 2 daughters, and you have property tax due in September, and you do not have time for any of this." "I can fix that," he said when he came down. "Saturday, if that's all right." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." "Mr. Colt," "Sam," he said, for the first time. Just that, quiet and steady, like he'd been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. She looked at him. "We've been drinking coffee together every morning for 2.5 weeks, he said. "I think we've earned first names." She should have held the line. She knew it even then. But his eyes were level, and his voice was honest, and the roof was leaking above her daughter's bed, and she said, "Saturday's fine, Sam." And if the way he looked at her then did something to the dam system she'd constructed around her chest, she was going to continue to be economical about that. Saturday came, and Sam showed up with roofing materials he'd said he'd sourced from the Harding Ranch surplus. And Clara had not asked too many questions about that, because a leaking roof was a leaking roof. He worked through the morning, and she worked inside, and the girls orbited him like planets around a new sun. Ella asking questions constantly, and Sarah watching with that careful, measuring look she'd inherited from Clara. It was mid-afternoon when Clara heard the wagon on the road. She came out to the porch and looked, and felt the morning's ease drain right out of her. Martin Calloway drove a fine wagon. He always had. He was the land agent for the county, a broad-shouldered man of 45, who wore his money the way some men wore their faith, visibly and often. He handled property transactions, tax assessments, and the quieter business of acquiring land when women like Clara fell behind on payments. She had been waiting for him to come around. She had not expected him to come quite this soon. "Mrs. Hollister," he tipped his hat from the wagon seat. "Fine morning." "It was," she said. He climbed down with the ease of a man comfortable everywhere. He looked at her house, at the fresh work on the roof, and his eyes tracked briefly and deliberately to where Sam stood above, watching. "Doing some repairs," Calloway said. "We are." "Good, good. A property in good repair holds value." He smiled the way people smiled when the smile was doing the work of a different expression. "That's actually what I've come to speak to you about. The property." Clara kept her chin level. "The tax isn't due until September 15th. No, of course not. This isn't about collection." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "This is an offer. Purchase offer. 32 acres at a fair market rate. I think you'll find the number quite reasonable, Mrs. Hollister, given the dry conditions this summer and the uncertainty of—" "No," Clara said. Calloway blinked. "You haven't seen the number." "It doesn't matter. Mrs. Hollister, with respect, I think you might want to— This is my land." Her voice didn't shake. It never shook. "My husband bought this land and worked this land and is buried on this land. The answer is no." A beat of silence. Calloway folded the paper carefully and tucked it back in his coat with the practiced patience of a man who was used to hearing no and knew how to wait it out. "The offer stands," he said pleasantly. "Through August, at least." He looked up at the roof again, looked at Sam again with that same deliberate quality, and something shifted in his expression, something assessing and cold that was gone before it had fully arrived. "You've got good help, it seems." "Good day, Mr. Calloway," Clara said. He tipped his hat and drove away. Clara stood on the porch and did not move until the wagon sound faded. Then she heard Sam coming down from the roof behind her. "You know him?" Sam asked. "He's the county land agent." "How long's he been after the property?" She turned. "What makes you think he's been after it?" "Man doesn't drive out with a prepared purchase offer unless he's been thinking about it for a while." His voice was level, but his jaw was set. "He come before today?" "He came in March," she admitted. "Right after the frost. I turned him down then, too." "He'll come again." "I know." She looked at the road, empty now. "That's why I need to make that tax payment." Sam was quiet a moment. "How short are you?" "That's not your concern." Clara. First name. Deliberate. She felt it land the way he'd meant it to. "How short?" She looked at him. This man who'd been on her roof on a Saturday. This man who'd fix what was broken without asking for anything back. And she felt the war that had been running since the morning in Whitmore's store. Pride on one side and plain need on the other. And she was so tired of fighting it. $6.40, she said quietly. He nodded, once. He didn't say anything about it, didn't offer immediately, didn't make her feel the weight of it. And she was grateful for that in a way she couldn't articulate. "All right," he said. And he went back up to finish the roof. That evening, after the girls were in bed and the house was quiet, Clara heard a knock at the door and found Sam on the porch with his hat in both hands. "I need to tell you something," he said. Her chest tightened. "All right." He didn't come in. He stood on the porch where they'd started, in the dark, and she stood in the doorway with the lamplight behind her. "I heard what they're saying in town," he said, "about me coming around." "I know what they're saying." "I want you to know, I haven't got any claim on you. I'm not coming around because I expect something. I'm not—" He stopped. "Try again. I know you've got enough to carry without people adding their talk to it. If you want me to stop, I'll stop. For real this time. And I won't—" He paused. "I won't make it hard." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Did you leave a woman in Colorado?" she asked. He went very still. "Where'd you hear that?" "Does it matter?" He turned his hat once. "Yes," he said. "I left an engagement 4 years ago. She wanted a settled life in Denver, and I—" He exhaled. "I wasn't ready to settle. I was still running from something I hadn't figured out yet." He looked straight at her. "I figured it out eventually." "What were you running from?" "My father's life," he said simply. "He was a man who stayed in one place and was bitter about it every day. I was scared staying meant becoming him." A beat. Took me a while to understand that staying and rotting are two different things. Clara absorbed that. "You're not running now?" she asked. "No, ma'am." His voice was quiet and absolute. "I'm not running." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she pushed the screen door open wider and said, "There's coffee on the stove. It's late, but you've got a long ride back." He came inside. They sat at the table for another hour, and this time it was different. The conversation went deeper and slower, like water finding the lower level it had always been moving toward. He told her about Colorado, his mother's face the morning she'd told her 4 sons that their father wasn't coming home. The way he'd made himself useful at age 9, because useful felt better than helpless, and he'd never quite stopped making that trade. Clara told him about Kansas, about Thomas in the early years, before the worry had settled in. About the way she'd been so certain that love was enough to build on, and how wrong and how right that had turned out to be, both at once. She told him more than she'd meant to. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door and looked at her with an expression she was starting to learn the grammar of. Honest, steady, asking nothing. "Calloway's going to come back," he said. "I know." "He's not the kind of man who takes no twice." "I know that too." "There are things I might be able to do about that," he said carefully, "if you'd let me help." "What kind of things?" "Legal things. Nothing that ain't above board." His jaw tightened slightly. "I know people. Harding's got a lawyer in Cheyenne who handles land disputes. Man like Calloway, sometimes just knowing somebody's looking at the paperwork makes him reconsider." Clara studied him. "Why would you do that?" The question sat there a moment. "Because," he said, and stopped, and started again in a different direction. "Because Calloway smiles like a man who's been getting everything he wants for a long time. And I've never been able to sit easy with that type." He paused. "And because those are your daughter's roses in the front yard. And I don't think they ought to be dug up for Martin Calloway." Clara held his gaze and felt something shift in her chest, something tectonic and quiet, like the first movement of ice in a spring thaw. It scared her. She was honest enough to admit that. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He put his hat on. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Sam." She locked the door behind him. She went to the window and watched his shape move down the dark path until it disappeared into the summer night. Then she went to Thomas's desk and sat down, and she looked at the numbers again, And for the first time in 8 months, they did not feel quite so much like a verdict. The next morning, Martha Gaines was at the door before Clara had finished her first cup of coffee, which meant whatever she'd come to say was either very important or very satisfying. And with Martha, it was usually both. "I thought you ought to know," Martha said, over the coffee Clara made because old habits, "that Martin Calloway was telling people at the feed store yesterday that he expects to have the Hollister property settled by September." Clara set her cup down. "Settled." "His word. He made an offer. I turned it down." "I know you did, honey. I'm just telling you what he said." Martha looked at her with the complicated expression of a woman who liked to deliver bad news, but genuinely believed it was for the recipient's good. "He also said, and I'm just repeating, that a woman alone with 2 children and a tax bill coming can only hold out so long." Clara was quiet. "And," Martha added, the word arriving like the heel of a boot, "he asked around about your cowboy." "About Sam Colt. He's not my cowboy." "He's been on your roof, Clara. He fixed a leak. He's been in your kitchen every morning for 3 weeks." Clara looked at the window. What did Calloway find out? Martha's expression shifted, something between triumph at having the information and genuine discomfort at what it was. "Sam Colt's not just a ranch hand," she said. "He came to Caldwell Creek 8 months ago, right around the time Thomas died." She paused. "Calloway says Colt worked for a land survey company before he came to Harding's. Says he might be scouting properties for outside buyers." The kitchen went very quiet. Clara heard the clock on the mantel ticking. She heard Ella laughing at something Sarah had said in the back bedroom. She felt the words rearranging themselves inside her chest, taking on new weight and new shape. And she sat with that, and did not let her face show any of it. "Thank you, Martha," she said, carefully, evenly. Martha left, and Clara sat alone at the table where Sam had sat every morning for 3 weeks, with his bread and his honest eyes and his "I'm not running." And she looked at the empty chair across from her and felt the cold come in through the cracks. 6:15 the next morning, she was on the porch when she heard his boots on the path. She had left the door closed. He came up and saw it and stopped, and looked at her sitting there with both hands around her cup and no second cup visible. And she watched something move through his eyes, something quick and careful. And he stood at the bottom of the porch steps and waited. "I need to ask you something," Clara said, "and I need a straight answer." "All right. Did you work for a land survey company before you came to Harding's?" He didn't answer immediately, and in that half-second of silence, she felt everything she'd been cautiously, stubbornly allowing herself to build these past 3 weeks tilt on its foundation. "Yes," he said. The word landed between them like a stone dropped in still water, and Clara felt the rings of it move outward through her chest. "Yes," Sam said again, as if once hadn't been enough, as if he wanted to make sure she'd heard it clearly. "I worked for the Continental Land and Survey Company out of Denver, from 1879 to the spring of 1882. Clara looked at him. She did not say anything yet. She had learned that silence was a better instrument than anger when you needed the truth, because anger gave a man something to push against, and silence gave him nothing but himself. "I left that job," he said, "before I came here." "Why?" He came up one step. She didn't stop him. "Because I found out what the company was really doing. They weren't just surveying land for development. They were identifying properties, widow farms, failed homesteads, anything with a tax problem or a title dispute, and feeding that information to buyers who had relationships with county agents." He paused. "Men like Calloway." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. You're telling me you used to do exactly what Calloway is doing to me? I'm telling you I mapped properties. I didn't know what the information was being used for until I'd been there 2 years. His jaw was tight. When I found out, I quit. I walked into the office, put the survey kit on the desk, and didn't look back. And then you came to Caldwell Creek. 8 months later, yes. Right around the time Thomas died. He held her eyes. I didn't know Thomas Hollister. I didn't know your name before I saw you in Whitmore's store. I came to Caldwell Creek because Hardy needed a hand, and I needed work, and I was done drifting. He took another step. He was at the base of the porch steps now, close enough that she could see the exact set of his expression, which was a man who had done something wrong that he couldn't undo, and had decided that the only thing left was to stand in it and not flinch. I swear to you, Clara, on my mother's grave, I had no knowledge of your land. I had no interest in your property. I came to that general store, and I saw a woman put back flowers she couldn't afford, and I thought about my mother, and I acted. That is every piece of it. Clara listened to every word. She measured each one against what she knew of him, which was 3 weeks of mornings and a man who sat with her daughters the way you sat with children you actually saw, and a roof fixed on a Saturday, and a voice that said, "I'm not running in the dark." She wanted to believe him. She was terrified of how much she wanted to believe him. "I need you to go," she said. His face didn't crumple. It held. "All right. I need time to think." "I understand." "I'm not—" She stopped, steadied. "I'm not saying I think you're lying. I'm saying I don't know yet. And until I know, I can't have you at this table." He nodded once. He didn't argue, didn't press, didn't try to walk back the yes. He put his hat on, and he turned, and he walked down the path, and Clara watched him go and did not call him back. And the morning felt enormous and empty, and she hated that it did. She didn't sleep much the next 2 nights. She replayed the conversations she could remember, word by word, looking for the seams, the places where a man running a long game would have slipped and shown the mechanics beneath. She looked for them with everything she had, because if they were there, she needed to find them. And if they weren't there, she needed to know that too. She didn't find them. What she found instead, in the careful audit of 3 weeks, was a man who had never once asked about the land, who had never asked about the mortgage or the tax situation, or the title, or the acreage, who had fixed the roof and drunk the coffee and looked at her daughters like they were worth looking at, and who had told her about Calloway's threat before she'd had any reason to ask. That didn't prove anything. She knew that. But it meant something. On the 3rd morning, Sarah came to the kitchen and looked at the empty table and looked at Clara and said, "He's not coming?" "Not today." "Why?" "Because I asked him not to." Sarah sat down slowly. She wrapped her hands around her cup the way she always did, and she looked at the table, and then she said, "Did he do something wrong?" "I don't know yet." "You don't know, or you're scared to know?" Clara looked at her daughter. "Mama," Sarah said quietly, with the particular gentleness of a child who had learned to be careful with the people they loved. "He's not Papa. I know that. He's never going to be Papa." She paused. "But he showed up every morning, and he fixed the roof. And when Ella told him about June the doll, he listened like it mattered." She looked up. Men who are pretending don't listen that hard. Clara was quiet. "I'm 12, Sarah said. "I know I don't know everything, but I know that." On the 4th morning, Sam didn't come, which was what she'd asked for. But she stood at the window at 6:15 anyway, and she stood there longer than she would have admitted to anyone. At 9 o'clock, Ella found her at the desk. "Mama, when is Mr. Sam coming back?" "I don't know, sweetheart." "Did you have a fight?" Not exactly. Ella climbed into the chair across from her, June the doll under one arm, and looked at Clara with the full, unfiltered seriousness of a 7-year-old who had decided something was important. "Mama, he's nice." "I know he is." "He listens when I talk. Most grown-ups don't." "I know." "And he fixed our roof." "Ella." "And his bread is really good." She paused. "Mama, I think Papa would have liked him." Clara pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Go play with your sister," she said, voice carefully even. Ella went, slowly and with a backward glance that was pure Thomas. The knock came that afternoon. Not Sam. The knock was wrong, too deliberate, too self-satisfied, and Clara knew before she opened the door. Martin Calloway stood on her porch in his good coat. "Mrs. Hollister," the smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," she said. She did not move aside. "I'll be brief then." He reached into his coat and produced the same folded paper as before. But when he held it out this time, the number on it was different. Higher. "I've revised my offer. I think you'll find it considerably more—" "Mr. Calloway," her voice was flat, "you can keep revising that number until it reaches $100, and the answer is still no." His smile thinned, but held. "Mrs. Hollister, I have some information I think you ought to have before you make that decision. As a courtesy." "I don't want your courtesies." "It concerns Sam Colt." He said the name the way a man plays a card he's been holding for the right moment. "You know he worked for Continental Land and Survey." She kept her face still. "I know." That surprised him. She saw it. But he recovered quickly. "Then you know that Continental has active contracts in 3 Wyoming counties, including this one." He paused, letting the weight settle. "The man working your roof is still on their payroll, Mrs. Hollister. He never left." The words hit her like cold water. She looked at Calloway and she measured him. The careful timing of this visit. The 4 days of Sam's absence. The particular pleasure underneath the concern in Calloway's voice. And she said, "Show me." He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Show me the proof. If you're going to make that claim, you show me something that supports it." A beat. "I don't have documents with me." "Then come back when you do." She put her hand on the door. "Good day, Mr. Calloway." She closed it on his face. Then she stood with her back against it and breathed and let herself feel the fear for exactly 30 seconds before she put it away and thought clearly. Calloway had come 4 days after Sam left. He knew Sam had left. That meant he'd been watching, which meant he wanted her isolated, which meant Sam's presence was something Calloway was actively trying to remove. A man who was working with Calloway would not need to be removed. She held that thought. She tested it from every angle. Then she went to her bedroom, opened the chest at the foot of the bed, and found the paper she'd put there in March, the first time Calloway had come with his offer, 2 weeks after Thomas died. She read it again carefully, looked at the surveying notes in the margins that she hadn't understood then, the parcel numbers, the assessment figures, looked at the date. That offer had been prepared 3 weeks before Thomas died. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she put on her hat and walked the half-mile to the Harding ranch. He was in the yard when she came through the gate, working on a section of fence with 2 other hands, and he saw her before she said anything. He set the tools down and came toward her, and his face was doing that careful thing it did when he was waiting to find out what kind of conversation was happening. "Calloway came," she said. "When?" "An hour ago. He says you're still on Continental's payroll." Sam's expression hardened. That's a lie. I need more than your word on it. I know you do. He was already moving toward the barn. Come with me. She followed him inside. He went to a locked box on the shelf above his bunk, opened it, and handed her a folded envelope. Inside was a letter, dated April 1882, on Continental Land and Survey letterhead, formally releasing Samuel R. Colt from his contract and all affiliated obligations, signed by the company director. She read it twice. That's the original, he said. I kept it because I knew someday someone would say exactly what Calloway said. She looked up. Calloway's offer was dated 3 weeks before Thomas died. Something shifted in Sam's face. Something cold and focused. How do you know that? It was on the original offer. I didn't understand the date at the time. I do now. She held his eyes. He was planning this before Thomas was even in the ground. Sam was quiet for a moment. Very quiet. Then he said, I need you to let me show you something. He pulled out a folded map from the same box. A survey map, hand-drawn, with property lines and parcel numbers marked across it. He spread it on the bunk and pointed to a parcel in the northwest corner. That's your land, he said. All 32 acres. She looked. That's a water survey line running along the northeast edge of your property. He traced it with one finger. There's a spring, underground. It was identified in a Continental survey 6 years ago and never made public because the company had a policy of holding that kind of information for buyers. He paused. Clara, your land isn't just 32 acres of dry pasture. Under it is the best freshwater source in a 20-mile radius. She stared at the map. Calloway knows, Sam said. That's why he's been after this property since before Thomas died. If he gets your land, he controls the water rights for every ranch in the valley, every homestead. He can charge what he wants, sell what he wants, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. The full weight of it moved through her slowly, the way large things do, too big for the mind to take all at once. You knew about the water survey, she said. I mapped that property, he said, in 1881, before I knew what the information was for. He held her eyes. When I came to Caldwell Creek and recognized the parcel number on the county listing, I knew what Calloway was doing. That's why I came to your store that morning, not to help Calloway, to figure out how to stop him. Clara looked at him. She looked at the map. She looked at the letter in her hand. Why didn't you just tell me? She said. From the beginning. Why bread and coffee and 3 weeks of... Because you wouldn't have believed a stranger walking up and saying, your dead husband's land has secret water on it, and the county agent is running a scheme. He was direct, unflinching. You'd have told me to go to hell and shut the door, and been right to do it. I needed you to know I wasn't going anywhere first. The barn was very quiet. So the bread, she started. Was just bread, he said firmly. That part was just what I said it was. My mother was a widow. I know what it looks like. The bread was real. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the survey line on the map, the thin penciled line running along her northeast edge, and she thought about Thomas, who'd believed the land would take care of them. And maybe, in a way she couldn't have imagined, it had been trying to all along. What do we do? She said. The question surprised him. She could see that. The we of it. He looked at her for a moment with that expression she'd been learning the grammar of. And then he said, There's a land rights attorney in Cheyenne. Harding's used him twice. If we can get him the survey evidence and Calloway's original offer date, we can file an injunction against any forced sale and open a fraud inquiry with the county. How long does that take? A week, maybe 2 if I ride hard. You'd go to Cheyenne? I'd leave tomorrow. She looked at him. You'd do that? Yes. Why? He held her gaze, and there was nothing in his face that was performing anything. It was just a man being seen all the way through and not looking away from it. Because you put that flower back on the shelf and walked out with your chin level, he said. And I have not stopped thinking about that since the day I saw it. And because whatever this is, he paused, searching for the word, whatever's been happening between us every morning at that table, I don't want to let Calloway take it. He exhaled. And because those are your daughters in that house, and they deserve to grow up on land that's theirs. Clara was quiet long enough that a lesser man would have filled the silence. Sam Colt waited. All right, she said finally. Go to Cheyenne. Something in his shoulders let go. I'll be back in 8 days. I'll be here. He folded the map and held it out to her. Keep this. Don't let Calloway in your house while I'm gone. She took it. Their fingers brushed, the first time anything like that had happened, and neither of them made anything of it out loud, but she felt it in her hand all the way home. He left the next morning before sunup. She didn't see him go, but Ella came to her bedroom at 5:30 to say there was something on the porch, and Clara went out and found a week's worth of bread wrapped in cloth, and a jar of fresh milk, and a single folded note that said, in plain, unadorned handwriting, "The coffee had better be hot when I get back." Clara stood on the porch and looked at that note for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and held it there. He was gone for 8 days. On the 5th day, Calloway came back. He didn't bring the revised offer this time. He came with a man Clara didn't recognize. Large, quiet, the kind of quiet that was its own kind of loud. And they stood at the foot of the porch steps, and Calloway said, pleasantly and precisely, I filed a petition with the county to have the property assessed for delinquent tax adjustment, Mrs. Hollister. The 15th of September is a hard date. If the assessment goes through, the sale could be compelled before your payment is even due. Clara stood on her porch and looked at him, and thought about the survey map in the chest at the foot of her bed, and the letter from a law office in Cheyenne that she hadn't opened yet, because Sam had said to wait. I look forward to discussing it with my attorney, she said. Calloway blinked. Your attorney? Good day, Mr. Calloway. She watched them drive away, and she felt the fear move through her, and she let it. And then she reached into her apron pocket and felt the folded note, and held onto the plain, hard certainty of it. A man who went to Cheyenne, and who said the coffee had better be hot. On the 8th day, Sam Colt rode up the path at dusk, with dust on his coat and something in his expression that she couldn't read, until he got close enough that she could see it was not defeat. She came off the porch to meet him. He held out a sealed envelope with the Cheyenne address of one Everett Marsh, attorney at law. Injunctions filed, he said. Calloway can't move on the property until the fraud inquiry is resolved. Could take 6 months. Might take longer. He paused. And Marsh found 2 other landowners Calloway pushed out with the same method. They're willing to testify. Clara took the envelope. She held it with both hands. Your land's safe, Sam said quietly. For now, it's safe. She stood there in the last of the evening light, holding the evidence of a man who'd ridden 300 miles and back for 32 acres that weren't his. And she felt the last of the dam she'd been tending for 8 months develop a crack she was no longer certain she wanted to repair. You need supper, she said, because she was Clara Hollister, and that was how she started things. Yes, ma'am, Sam said. Coffee's hot, she said, like I promised. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth did that thing it did, and he walked beside her up the porch steps and through the door into the lamplight, and Sarah looked up from the table and nodded once. And Ella launched herself off her chair and said, "Mr. Sam, did you know there's water under our land?" And Clara stopped in the kitchen doorway and turned to look at Sam Colt, standing in her home with her daughters, and said, "I never told her that." Sam looked at Ella. "How'd you know about the water?" Ella held up June the doll with complete seriousness. "June told me," she said. "June knows things." Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. And for the first time in 8 months, what came out of her was not carefully managed, and not economical, and not practical at all. She laughed, full and real and startled out of her, the way only the best things were. And Sam Colt stood in her kitchen doorway and looked at her like a man who had just found the thing he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking. And he held his hat in both hands and said nothing at all. He didn't need to. The supper that night was the loudest the Hollister house had been in 8 months. Ella talked without stopping, which was her natural condition, but there was a particular brightness to it now, a looseness that told Clara her youngest daughter had been holding herself tighter than a 7-year-old ought to have to. She told Sam about every event of the 8 days he'd been gone, in exact chronological order, including the time the dog got into the cornmeal, and the time Sarah said a word Ella wasn't supposed to repeat, and then repeated it twice for documentation purposes. Sarah said, "I will end you, Ella," without looking up from her plate. Sam kept his expression straight, with visible effort. Clara watched it all from across the table, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Safe. Not safe in the way of a locked door or a paid bill. Safe the way a house feels when everyone you love is in it and accounted for, and the night is outside where it belongs. It scared her so much she got up and poured coffee nobody needed just to have something to do with her hands. After the girls were in bed, she and Sam sat at the table the way they had in the early weeks, except that everything was different now, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so directly, because some things move at their own pace, regardless of what you know. He walked her through what Marsh had filed, the injunction, the fraud inquiry, the 2 other landowners who'd been pushed off their properties using Callaway's same pattern of early purchase offers and manufactured tax pressure. He was thorough and clear, the way a man is when he respects the intelligence of who he's talking to. And Clara listened and asked sharp questions, and he answered every one without hedging. "How long before the inquiry resolves?" she asked. "Marsh says 6 months minimum. Could be a year." He paused. "But Callaway can't move against you during that period. Any sale attempt gets automatically challenged." "And the tax payment? September 15th is still real." "It is." He didn't look away from it. "I've got some money set aside." Clara's jaw tightened. "No." "Clara." "No, Sam. That line I'm holding." She looked at him steadily. "I will find $6.40. I'll sell the plow before I take a loan from you." He studied her face for a moment, and she could see him measuring the distance between pushing and respecting, and she was glad when he landed on the right side of it. "All right," he said. "Thank you," she said. "For Cheyenne. For all of it." He turned his cup in his hands. "Clara, I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it without stopping me." She went still. "I know the timing's wrong," he said. "I know you've got the land situation and the tax and 2 daughters and 8 months of trying to hold everything together. And I know that adding anything on top of that is not—" He stopped. Tried again. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not trying to push something before it's ready. But I need you to know that the reason I went to Cheyenne wasn't just because it was right. It was because you matter to me." He held her eyes. "You and Sarah and Ella. You matter to me in a way that I haven't got a category for yet, and I don't want to pretend I don't feel it." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara looked at him for a long moment and felt the dam in her chest straining at every joint. "I know," she said softly. "You know," he repeated. "I've known for a while. I just didn't know what to do with it." He nodded. That was enough, for now, and he seemed to understand that, because he didn't press further, just sat with it, the way he sat with most things, steady and patient, and not needing to fill the space with more than it could hold. "Get some sleep," she said finally. "You rode 300 miles. "Yes, ma'am." He stood and put his hat on. "The bread'll be on the railing in the morning." "I know it will," she said. She listened to his boots on the path long after the dark had taken him. 2 days later, the whole thing nearly fell apart. It came from a direction Clara hadn't been watching, which was the direction she should have been watching all along. James Harding came to her door on a Tuesday morning. He was a spare man of 55, with a face built for hard weather and harder decisions. And he had always been fair in Clara's limited experience of him, which made the expression he was wearing now that much more alarming. "Mrs. Hollister," he said, and stopped, and turned his hat in his hands in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of Sam. "I'm not sure how to start this." "Plain usually works," she said. He exhaled. "Martin Calloway came to see me yesterday." Clara's hands went still on the door. "He came with paperwork," Harding continued. "Survey records. The water source on your property. The underground spring. He's filed a claim that the spring's origin point is on my northeast pasture, which would mean the water rights belong to me, not to you. And he's offered to buy those rights." The ground shifted. "He says," Harding continued carefully, "that if I sell him the water rights, your land becomes worthless to him, and he'll drop the whole acquisition." He paused. "And he says if I don't, he'll use the survey dispute to tie up both properties in litigation for 3 years, which I can't afford any more than you can." Clara looked at him. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him I'd think on it." He held her gaze, and there was something in his eyes that was genuinely troubled. "Mrs. Hollister, I have 12 hands and 200 head of cattle, and a note on this ranch that comes due in November. I am not a man who can afford 3 years of litigation for someone else's benefit." He paused. "But I'm also not a man who wants to be the instrument of a widow losing her land. So I'm here, telling you before I decide." Clara understood immediately what this was, because she was a practical woman, and she had started to understand the shape of Calloway's mind. He'd been cut off from the front, so he'd gone around the back. "Mr. Harding," she said, "Sam brought back documentation from Marsh and Cheyenne. The original survey shows the spring origin on my property, not yours. Calloway's claim is manufactured." Harding looked at her carefully. "You have that documentation." "I do." "Marsh is prepared to defend it?" "In county court, yes." A long pause. "Then Calloway lied to me about the survey." "He's been lying to everyone about everything," Clara said. "That's the only tool he's got." Harding was quiet for a moment. Then something in his face settled into the expression of a man who has been given permission to do the thing he wanted to do anyway. "I'll call Calloway this afternoon," he said. "Tell him what he can do with his offer." He put his hat back on. "Sam's a good man, Mrs. Hollister. He's been the best hand I've had in 10 years. Whatever he's doing to help you, it's got my backing." Clara felt something ease in her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Harding." "Don't thank me. Just win." He climbed back on his horse. "And tell Sam I need him back at the ranch by Thursday. This property situation doesn't stop the fences from needing mending." She almost smiled. I'll tell him." She sent word to Sam through one of the Harding hands, and he was at her door within the hour. She told him everything Harding had said, and she watched Sam's face go through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Relief, anger, something calculating, and then a return to steady. "Calloway's getting desperate," he said. "That's not comforting." "No, but desperate men make mistakes." He thought for a moment. "I need to talk to Marsh again. If Calloway approached Harding with a falsified survey, that's not just fraud. That's conspiracy to defraud. It's a different criminal category." "What does that mean for us?" "It means the inquiry could become a criminal proceeding." He paused. "It means Calloway could lose his land agent license, his income, everything." Clara absorbed that. "He knows that risk." "Yes. Which means he'll push harder before he backs off." Sam met her eyes. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then we need to be ready." He looked at her, the way he'd been looking at her lately, like someone who was still slightly surprised by who she turned out to be every time he remembered. And he said quietly, "When did you stop being scared of this?" "I'm still scared," she said. "I'm just done letting it drive." He held her gaze for a moment that was longer than a practical moment needed to be. Then he said, "I'll write to Marsh today." The letter went out Thursday. By Friday, Martin Calloway had heard about it. Clara knew because he showed up at the feed store when she was there with Ella, and he didn't approach her, just stood across the room and looked at her with a smile that had finally, fully dropped its good manners. It was the look of a man who had decided to stop pretending. Ella pressed close to Clara's side and said nothing, which was such an unusual condition for Ella that Clara looked down and saw her daughter staring back at Calloway with Thomas's expression of flat, immovable judgment. "That man's not nice," Ella said quietly, for Clara only. "No," Clara said. "He's not." She picked up what she needed and left without looking at Calloway again, but she felt his eyes on her back the whole way to the door, and outside on the boardwalk, she held Ella's hand tighter than usual and moved fast. Ella didn't complain about the pace. She just held on. That evening, Sam came by later than usual, and he was carrying something different in his face. Not alarm exactly, more like the expression a man wears when he's looked at a situation and recalculated. "Something happened," Clara said before he sat down. "Marsh sent a telegram." He sat. "Calloway filed a counter-petition this afternoon. He's claiming that Sam Colt acted as an unlicensed agent in the Cheyenne filing. Says the injunction should be dismissed on procedural grounds because Marsh was engaged by a third party with no legal standing in the case." Clara stared. "You have no standing?" "I'm not the property owner. Legally, I have no direct interest in the dispute." He paused. "Marsh says the argument is thin, but thin arguments in front of the right judge can hold for months." "Can you get standing?" He looked at her. She heard the question in the silence before she understood what the silence was actually about. "There are a few ways," he said, carefully. "Business partnership with the property owner would do it. A formal contract of some kind." He paused. Or what?" she said, though something in her already knew. "A spouse has automatic legal standing," he said quietly. "That's the clearest path. Legally." The kitchen held the word between them. Clara looked at him. He was looking at the table, giving her room, and she could see in the line of his jaw how much discipline that was costing him. "Sam," he looked up, "is that a legal strategy? Or are you—" She stopped, started again. "Are you asking me something?" A beat, then 2. Both, he said. Honestly, both. Clara felt the dam crack wide open. She'd been managing it for weeks, managing it the way she managed everything, with economy and practicality, and the constant application of sense to feeling. And it had worked, right up until this moment, when a man with honest eyes said both in her kitchen and looked at her like a question he'd been building up to for a long time. "I loved Thomas," she said. "I know you did." "I'm not replacing him." "I'm not asking you to." His voice was steady and sure. "He's your daughter's father. He's a part of this house and this land, and that's right, and it should be. I'm not trying to walk into somebody else's space." He paused. "I'm asking if there's a space that's mine, if it exists yet, if it could." Clara looked at this man who had brought bread to a stranger, fixed a roof on a Saturday, ridden to Cheyenne and back, outmaneuvered a land agent, and sat at her table every morning like he simply belonged there. And she thought about Thomas, who'd been good and impractical and gone too soon. And she thought about the 11 cents in an apron pocket and the woman who'd learned to keep her chin level. And she thought about a 7-year-old who said, "June knows things," and laughed in a way that startled the whole room back to life. "I don't know yet," she said, "if there's a space. I think there might be. I think maybe I've been trying not to look at it directly." "That's honest," he said. "That's all I've got right now." "That's enough." He held her eyes. "I can wait for the rest." The morning of September 8th brought two things. The first was a notice from the county assessor delivered by Ryder. A formal demand for payment by September 15th, with no grace period, citing the pending tax adjustment petition Calloway had filed. $6.40, hard and final. Clara held the notice and did not let her hands shake. The second thing was Sarah, who came to the kitchen before Clara had even put the coffee on, dressed and composed and holding an envelope. "Sit down, Mama," she said. Clara sat. Sarah put the envelope on the table. "There's $4.11 in there. It's from my mending work. Mrs. Alvarez and the Greer family and the Petersons." She paused. "I've been saving since May." Clara stared at the envelope. "I know it's not all of it," Sarah said, "but it's most of it." "Sarah?" Clara's voice came out wrong, too thin, too full. "You were saving in May? May, June, July, August?" Sarah sat down across from her, composed as a judge. "I knew about the tax. I heard you up at night with the numbers." She paused. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make it harder. But I've been working on it." Clara looked at her daughter, 12 years old, Thomas's eyes, Clara's stubbornness, and something that was entirely her own. Something steady and clear and extraordinary that had apparently been operating without Clara's knowledge for 4 months. "Baby," Clara said, and her voice broke cleanly in half on the word. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's. She didn't say anything else. She just held on. They sat there a while, $2.29 short. 4 days left. Sam came at 6:15 and read the notice and read Clara's face and looked at the envelope and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I've got it." "Sam, before you say no, hear me out." His voice was different, not pushing, not performing, just direct. "This isn't charity. It's not a loan. It's me investing in property that I happen to know has the most valuable water source in 20 miles, because I surveyed it myself." He paused. "And it's me asking for nothing in return except that you don't let Calloway win." A beat. "And maybe that you don't send me away." She looked at him. "That last part's not a condition. he added quickly. "The money's yours, either way." Clara looked at the envelope with Sarah's $4.11 in it, and the notice with the hard date on it, and the man across the table who'd said both last night and was saying, "Invest now," because he understood her well enough to know that was the only framing she could accept. "I will pay you back," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Every cent." "With interest." His mouth moved. "That's not necessary." "It is to me." "Then yes," he said simply. "With interest." She nodded. He nodded. The thing was settled, and it was practical, and underneath it was everything that didn't have a practical category and didn't need one. They made the payment on September 13th, 2 days early. Clara walked into the county office with the full amount, set it on the counter in front of the clerk, and waited while it was counted and receipted. The clerk, a young man who knew everyone's business the way young clerks in small towns always did, looked at the receipt and then at Clara and said, "This clears the account entirely, Mrs. Hollister." "I know," she said. She took the receipt and walked out into the September sun and stood for a moment on the boardwalk. The payment was done. The land was secure, at least until the inquiry resolved, and Marsh had written that the criminal fraud angle was developing well, that Calloway's position was weakening, that 2 more landowners had come forward. The sun was warm. The air had started to carry the first suggestion of autumn in it, that edge of something cooler underneath the heat. Sam was waiting at the bottom of the boardwalk steps, hat in hand. He'd insisted on driving her in, which she'd let him do without the argument she would have made 2 months ago. "Done?" he asked. "Done," she said. He looked at her face, at whatever was on it, and he said, "You all right?" She thought about it honestly, the way she was trying to think about things now, without the automatic economy, without the chin-level management. She thought about 8 months of surviving, and 11 cents in a pocket, and bread on a railing, and Cheyenne, and a 12-year-old who'd been secretly mending clothes since May, and a 7-year-old who told a rag doll things she needed someone to know. "I think I might be," she said. "Actually, and for real." Sam looked at her the way he'd looked at her that night in the kitchen, like a man who'd found the thing without knowing he was looking. And he put his hat back on and extended his arm, and she looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before she took it, and they walked down the main street of Caldwell Creek in the September morning with her hand on his arm. And if Martha Gaines was watching from the dry goods window, Clara found she had absolutely nothing left to spend on caring about that. Her land was paid. Her daughters were home. And the man beside her walked like someone who was exactly where he intended to be. That was enough for today. For this exact day, it was more than enough. 3 days later, Ella found the wild rose bush at the eastern edge of the yard. It had been there before, Clara knew, untended and sprawling and half-choked by the dry summer, and she'd been meaning to do something about it for months. Ella crouched beside it in the late afternoon and studied it with June the doll propped against her knee, and she said, without looking up, "Mama, this one's still trying." Clara crouched beside her. The rose bush was in rough shape, but along 2 of the lower branches there were small, tight buds, closed hard against the September air, waiting. "It is," Clara said. "Is it going to make it?" Clara looked at the buds, green at the base, holding on through everything the summer had thrown at them. "I think so," she said. Ella looked at her with Thomas's eyes, and something that was entirely Ella's own. "Good," she said firmly. "It should make it. It tried real hard." Clara put her arm around her daughter's small shoulders and held her, and felt the land underneath them, their land, their 32 acres, with the water running quiet and deep beneath the surface where no one could take it, and she breathed. Behind them, the door opened, and she heard Sam's boots on the porch, and Sarah's voice saying something about supper, and Sam answering, and the ordinary, irreplaceable music of a house that had people in it started up again. Ella leaned into her mother's side and said, "Do you love him, Mama?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I'm getting there," she said. Ella nodded like that was the right answer and the most sensible thing she'd heard all week. "Okay," she said. "June says you should hurry up, though." "Does she?" "She says you've been slow about it." "Tell June to mind her own business." Ella considered this diplomatically. "I'll tell her you said thank you for the input." Clara pressed her face against the top of her daughter's head, and what came out of her this time was quiet and real and not at all economical. And the rose bush held its buds in the September light, and the land held its water in the deep dark below. And Clara Hollister held her daughter and let herself, at long last, stop being so careful about what she allowed herself to want. The rose bush bloomed on the first day of October. Ella saw it first, the way Ella saw most things that mattered, at a pitch and volume the rest of the household couldn't miss. She came through the back door at a dead run, while Clara was at the stove and Sam was at the table with his second cup of coffee, and Sarah was braiding her own hair with the focused irritation of someone who hadn't quite mastered it yet. And Ella hit the kitchen like a small, joyful disaster and announced that June had been right, that the roses had made it, that there were 3 of them open and 2 more coming, and everyone needed to come outside immediately. Sam was up before Clara was. He held the door for both girls, and then looked back at Clara, still at the stove, and his expression was the quiet, warm, slightly disbelieving look of a man who could not entirely account for how he'd ended up here, in this kitchen, on this particular morning, and had decided that accounting for it was less important than simply not leaving. "Come see the roses, Clara," he said. She turned the heat down and went. The 3 open blooms were small and wild, and a deep, impossible pink, the color of something that had not been informed it was supposed to give up. Ella held June up to look at them, as a courtesy. Sarah crouched close and examined them with her scientific expression. Sam stood just behind Clara's left shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and she didn't move away from it. "They made it," Ella said, with enormous personal satisfaction, as if she had been a significant contributor to the outcome. "They did," Sam said. Ella looked at her mother. "I told you they would." "You did," Clara said. "June told me first." Ella considered the rose nearest her with judicial gravity. "But I believed it on my own." Sam's hand came to rest at the small of Clara's back. Brief, light, asking nothing. She didn't move. She stood in the early October morning with her daughters and the wild roses, and the quiet, certain warmth of his hand, and she thought, this exact thing. This is what 8 months of surviving was moving toward, even when she couldn't see it. Even when the numbers on Thomas's desk looked like a verdict. This. The telegram from Marsh arrived 4 days later, and it arrived fast, and it arrived without warning, the way telegrams always did when they were carrying something large. Sam read it first because he was at the feed store when the rider came through, and the message was addressed to both of them, which had become the practical reality of how things worked now. And that reality itself would have stopped Clara cold 2 months ago. But October Clara received it without alarm. He came directly to her door, no bread, no coffee, just the telegram, folded in his hand, and something in his face that she couldn't immediately read. She took it from him at the door. She read it standing there in the doorway, and she had to read it twice, because the first time she didn't trust what she was seeing. Martin Calloway had resigned his position as county land agent, effective immediately, pending investigation. The Wyoming Territorial Land Commission had opened a formal fraud inquiry based on the evidence Marsh had compiled. 3 additional landowners had come forward. The Hollister injunction had been converted from provisional to permanent. The property was protected until the inquiry concluded, and based on the weight of evidence, Marsh was confident the conclusion would be permanent. Clara lowered the telegram. "It's over?" she said. "The threat is," Sam said. "Calloway's not coming back. Not to your property. Not to anyone's." His jaw was tight, but his eyes were something else entirely. "Marsh says the commission is recommending that all improper acquisitions he facilitated be reviewed for reversal. Those two families who lost their land. There's a real chance they get it back." Clara stood very still. She thought about the flower she'd put back on Whitmore's shelf. She thought about the 11 cents. She thought about the night she'd looked at Thomas's numbers and couldn't see any possible way through. And the morning she'd found bread on the railing, like a question she hadn't known she needed to be asked. "Sam," she said. "Yeah?" "We won." He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth did that thing. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "We won." She stepped back and let him in, and for a moment, in the narrow hallway, they were close enough that the distance between them was no longer a practical distance. And she looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and neither of them moved for 2 full seconds. Then Ella's voice came from the back of the house. "Mama, Sarah took my hairbrush and won't give it back." Sarah's voice. "It was on the floor." Ella. "The floor is where I keep it." Clara and Sam looked at each other. He made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale, and stepped back. And the moment resolved itself into the ordinary, which was its own kind of extraordinary. "I'll get coffee," Clara said. "I'll referee," Sam said, and walked toward the argument. That evening, after the girls were in bed, after the telegram had been read twice more, and the coffee had been drunk and the supper dishes had been cleared, Sam and Clara sat on the porch in the October dark, and for a while neither of them said anything, just sat with the fact of it, the resolved and settled fact of it. "What do you want to do with the water rights?" Sam asked. She'd been thinking about it. "I want to talk to Marsh about setting a fair rate for the neighboring ranches. Not what Calloway would have charged. A fair rate. Something that helps the valley, rather than holding it hostage." "That's going to make you popular," he said, "and not as much money as you could make." "I didn't say it was the profit maximum choice." "No," he smiled. "You didn't. Harding kept Calloway from wrecking us with that second survey claim," she said. "He came to me first. He deserves a fair deal." "He'll get one." He paused. "You've thought this all the way through." "I've had time." She looked at her hands. 8 months of being alone teaches you to think things through before someone else makes the decision for you. He was quiet for a moment. "You're not alone now," he said carefully. She looked at him. "I mean, I don't want to assume." He stopped, tried again, and she appreciated the effort, the rare small crack in his usual steadiness. "I've been here every morning. I want to keep being here every morning. But I don't want to be something that's just happened to you by accumulation. I want to be something you chose." Clara held his gaze. "I know the difference between something that happened to me and something I chose," she said. "I know you do. You think I don't know which one you are?" He looked at her steadily, waiting. "I chose you," she said. Not softly, not tentatively. Clearly. The way she did the things she meant. "I chose you somewhere around the 4th morning with the terrible coffee, and I've been fighting the fact of it since, and I'm done fighting it." Sam was very still. "Now you can say whatever it is you've been working up to," she said, "because I can see you've been working up to something, and you've been patient about it for weeks, and I think you've earned the right to just say it." He turned to face her. He had his hat in both hands, and he looked at her with everything he had. No performance, no management. Just a man with his whole honest self showing. "I brought my heart, too," he said, "if you'll take it." There it was, simple as bread on a railing. Simple as 6:15 in the morning. Simple as a man who kept coming back. Clara felt every piece of the last 8 months shift and settle into new positions. Not erased, not replaced. Just rearranged into a shape that could hold more than grief, more than survival, more than just getting through. "I'll take it," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. Just her hand in both of his, the way he held everything, carefully and like he meant to keep it. And they sat in the October dark, with the roses somewhere below them in the yard, and the land beneath them with its quiet water, and the house behind them with her daughters sleeping. And Clara Hollister did not manage her feelings or apply economy to them or keep her chin level against them. She just felt them. All of them. The grief and the gratitude and the terror and the hope and the thing that was growing between her and this man that didn't have a precise name yet, but was real and solid and hers. "Thomas would have liked you," she said quietly. His hand tightened on hers. "I think he'd have had opinions about your boots," she added. Sam made a sound that was entirely laugh. "Everybody has opinions about my boots." "They're very dusty." "They've been to Cheyenne and back." "That's fair," she said. They sat until the night got cold, which it did faster now in October. And then they went inside, and she made the last coffee of the evening, and he drank it and took his leave at a decent hour. And she stood at the closed door for a moment before she went to bed, and simply breathed. 2 weeks later, Martha Gaines saw them walking together on the main street of Caldwell Creek, Clara's hand on Sam's arm, and she said something to Dora Pratt that Clara didn't catch and didn't try to catch. What she caught instead was Sarah, who had come with them into town and was walking on Clara's other side with her own list of items to fetch. And Sarah looked across her mother at Sam and said, without particular ceremony, "Are you going to ask her properly?" Sam looked down at her. "I'm working on the timing." "The timing's been fine for 2 weeks," Sarah said. "Sarah," Clara said, "I'm just saying." Sarah squared her shoulders in the way that meant she was about to be either very wise or very inconvenient, and it was a coin toss which. "Ella's going to start asking at Christmas if you don't." "I'm aware," Sam said gravely. "She'll ask at the dinner table." "I know." "In front of Mrs. Gaines, probably, if Mrs. Gaines comes." "Sarah," Clara said again, with more force. Sarah subsided, but Sam caught Clara's eye over her head, and what passed between them in that look was something that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't been at the table every morning for 2 months. A whole conversation in 3 seconds, and at the end of it, Clara looked forward again and said nothing, and felt her heart doing something it no longer needed to be economical about. The night he asked was a Tuesday, which was ordinary in exactly the right way. The girls were in bed, the supper was done, the coffee was the last of it. Sam had not ridden back to Harding's yet, and Clara had not suggested he should, and they were sitting at the table the way they sat at the table, easy and unhurried. And Sam reached into his coat pocket and set something small on the table between them. It was a ring. Plain, thin, silver. Nothing extravagant. Clara looked at it. "It was my mother's," Sam said. "She gave it to me before she died. Said to give it to a woman worth giving it to." His voice was level and certain. "I've been carrying it for 8 years." Clara's throat did something she didn't try to stop. "I'm not asking you to stop being Thomas's wife," Sam said. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm asking if you'll let me stay." He paused. Officially. Permanently. Not just at 6:15. Clara picked up the ring. She turned it once in her fingers, felt the weight of it. The 8 years of a man waiting to find the right place for his mother's ring. And she thought about the $4.11 in an envelope and a 12-year-old's quiet months of preparation and a 7-year-old who talked to a doll and somehow always knew things, and a land agent who'd made the mistake of coming for a woman who turned out not to be alone after all. She put the ring on. It fit. Of course it fit. Some things did. She looked up at him and said, "I've got 2 daughters, and 32 acres, and a fraud inquiry, and a water source, and a rose bush that nearly didn't make it. I know. You want all of that." "I want all of that," he said. "Every last bit." "Then yes," Clara said. "Stay." He exhaled the breath of a man who has been holding something for a very long time. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the ring warm between them, and they sat in the lamplight of the house that was hers and would be theirs. And the night was outside, where it belonged. In the morning, Ella came to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway and looked at her mother's hand and looked at Sam and looked back at the ring. Then she turned and ran back down the hall shouting, "Sarah! Sarah, she did it! She finally did it! June was right! I told you June was right!" Sarah's voice, flat and dignified. "I know, Ella. I've known for 2 weeks." Ella appeared back in the doorway, breathless and triumphant. "Can I be in the wedding?" "It's your wedding too," Sam said. "Both of you." Ella blinked. "It's our wedding?" "Your family," he said simply. "All of it. Not just your mama." Ella looked at him for a long moment, with the full serious weight of her 7 years. Then she walked to his chair, climbed up onto the bench beside him, and leaned against his arm, with June the doll tucked between them, the way she did things, wholly, without hedging. "Okay," she said. "You can stay." Sam looked at Clara over Ella's head. Clara looked back at him. His eyes were doing something she had learned to recognize by now. That complicated, quiet thing that was a man being moved by something he hadn't expected to be allowed to have. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Coffee's on," she said, which was how she'd started everything and how she intended to keep starting it. Every morning, for the rest of what was hers. They were married in November, on a Saturday, in the yard with the wild roses. Ella held June at a ceremonial angle and took the responsibility extremely seriously. Sarah stood beside her mother with Thomas's eyes and her own steady grace, and a smile that came out slow and meant everything. Harding came. 2 of the families from the inquiry came. Even Gerald Whitmore from the general store came, and shook Sam's hand after, and said not a single word about ledgers. Martha Gaines came too. She wore her good hat, and she stood in the back, and she did not say anything terrible to anyone. And that was the most generous thing she knew how to do, and Clara accepted it for what it was. The land was theirs. The water ran deep below, quiet and clean and permanent. The inquiry concluded in January with a formal fraud finding against Martin Calloway, his license revoked, 2 families returned to their properties, and a county record amended to reflect the true ownership of the water rights on 32 acres outside Caldwell Creek, Wyoming. Rights that belonged to Clara and Samuel Colt, their heirs, and all that came after them. Sam fixed the back fence in the spring. He built a 2nd bedroom in the summer, so Sarah and Ella would each have their own space, which Ella immediately complained was too quiet. And Sam built a small connecting shelf between the rooms so the girls could pass notes, and Ella approved of this arrangement and declared June's official residence to be the shelf itself, as a symbol of cooperation. Clara watched all of it and let herself want it and let herself have it, and did not manage a single feeling to death. On a morning in June, the roses bloomed again. More of them this time, wild and deep pink and thriving, as though they'd been waiting for someone to stop worrying long enough to let them. And Clara stood at the porch railing with her coffee, and Sam came up behind her and rested his chin on the top of her head. And she leaned back against him, and the land stretched out in front of them in the early summer light. theirs, and steady and alive. She had started with 11 cents and a chin she refused to lower, and she had built something from that, something real and worth the building. And the man behind her had brought bread to her railing on a morning she hadn't known she needed him, and stayed every single day since, not because he had to, not because she'd asked, but because some people, when they find where they belong, simply stop leaving. Clara Hollister had survived the worst year of her life by keeping her chin level and her hands busy and her heart protected. And then Sam Colt had walked up her path at 6:15 in the morning, and she had learned, at long last, that surviving and living were two entirely different things. And she was finally, fully, and without apology, doing both.